really, really great to see everyone here. I'm especially excited to see two people who we haven't had on this Discord call ever before. And these are Steven from Adobe Commerce and Carlos. And I'm super glad to have Carlos on the call because I invited him a couple of days ago. He said, "Yeah, I'm going to do it," and then he said, maybe not." And now he's back here. So that's how you keep the excitement up, Carlos. Good job on that. And the main reason is that Carlos wrote a blog post about commerce and edge delivery services, and that blog post is about 11 minutes reading time. And if you know me, then that's about 9 minutes too much reading time for me. So that's why I said, you know what, Carlos, why don't you come
Oh, we're
here?
gonna do a
And I
live
can
reading.
and I can interview you about it. And then on top of that, you brought Steven, so that's making it even better. Um, before we begin, can you can you tell us what you do at Adobe, what you do with commerce, um, and what brings you to Discord?
Yeah, you brought me to Discord. No, yeah, I've been on Adobe for what? Very long time. No, six, five. I think it's gonna be 6 years soon. I've been on the commerce side the whole time. Based
Okay,
in Austin, Texas. That's where our office are for
great.
commerce. And for the last 2 years, we've been working on what this new storefront is going to be. I like to call it the Adobe storefront. For those who don't know, Adobe Commerce comes from acquisition of Magento, which is an open
Mhm.
source that's been going for a while. Huge community. Before Summit, there were Magento, Imagine, and Vegas too. Like huge community, like I said. Um, um, but since the acquisition of Adobe, we've been looking at how we integrate the different solutions, right? What does it look like when mission customer says AEM? How do you make it shoppable? How do you bring Adobe Commerce into the equation? And the answer has been, AEM has this solution with SIF, which is pretty much, Magento or Adobe Commerce has its own
I think
API. So,
SIF was commerce integration frameworks
right.
for all people who love acronyms as much as I do.
Yes. Thank you. I didn't know that what that meant. But it was this layer in AEM that integrated with the headless APIs.
Yes.
Um, Before joining the engineering team, I was actually part of the pre-sales team. So I helped support sales demos.
Right.
So I was had a lot of experience with setting up, looking at customers' requirements, what it would look like if they adopt Adobe Commerce, and and they all came from, they were enterprise users, AEM. They want to use their APIs, and there was always this, okay, this is great. There's APIs to build everything, but they had to build everything.
Right.
Which my developer mind was like, yeah, that's great. You get to build anything you want, but
Mm.
people want
Yeah.
starting point, right? They want something that have the baseline done and give you, starting point, following best practices. You can save time and work. So we're looking at the best way to, again, like I see it, the Adobe storefront. How does everything work in harmony? If you're an AEM developer, you're a Java developer. If you're an Adobe Commerce developer, you're a PHP developer. And then we had a solution in the middle they were working on called PW Studio, and that was a React JavaScript application.
Hmm.
But that meant that, if you want to work something out that all of them integrate, then you need to shuffle around different tech stack,
Yeah.
and developers need to learn different things. So with EDS, somebody? No? Okay.
Yeah. Wait. I don't have the
Edge
sample
delivery
open.
Thank
services.
you. With Edge Delivery Services, this is, along the way, it was introduced as the new AEM, a new way to build websites, everything with JavaScript and just kind of like the core to the bone web technologies. And 2 years ago, we started working on how do we make those edge delivery service websites shoppable. Can we bring commerce components into it, and then you have a website, and now when I have a cart, have a checkout, just bring those functionalities so you can turn it into a storefront, pretty much. And Steven, you want to add to that? Because I'm about to start coughing soon. Sorry. For those that don't join, I'm going through a cold, so I'm doing my best to just keep the cadence. But yeah, Steven.
Yeah. No, I think you did a great job of explaining it. And I want to add that on top of just making EDS shoppable, one of the things that we set out to do was to build a solution that allows customers and merchants to piece together their storefront with more control, and lower cost in terms of how much effort it takes to do updates to various pieces. If you were ever working with PWA Studio, when the upstream gets changed, there's a lot of changes and migration work to keep that in sync. Whereas we've decomposed into these components we're calling drop-ins, and so and within those drop-ins you have containers, and so each of these things is sort of like Lego blocks that you can put together, and you can there's integration between them, but the surface is very a little more restrictive, so it just helps reduce that cost of upgrading. Yeah.
So help me understand the overall architecture. How would I get started in building an online shop on edge delivery services? Right. I get how to get.
Those are two questions.
How to run AEM up, and how. Right. So my first question would be, where do I get the product data from? How do I get this to show up on my site? Because I think a shop without product detail pages is really just a website. So where do I get my product detail pages from?
Right. So with like setting aside edge delivery services for a second, with the way the drop-ins work is you configure them with your endpoint, some other values like environment ID and other things that are required by Adobe Commerce APIs. And the drop-ins will make requests for the data that they need in order to render, and then they will also render. So technically, these drop-ins are like we call them like composition layer agnostic. You can use them on like a standard index HTML page if you can write that code. But we've gone ahead and done a lot of that for people with our boilerplate. So if you start today, you can take the boilerplate and fork it, and it out of the box is pointing to our demo backends, and so you can try it out and see how the data works, how the drop-ins request data. All that rendering happens inside the drop-ins, inside those containers we're talking about right now. But yeah, there's sort of like right now with regards to EDS, we're talking about
edge delivery services.
I knew it was coming. I know it's coming every time I say that. We're looking at like how someone would compose their site from the marketer perspective. So folks working in the document, I'm not familiar with the exact terms we're using here, but in like Google Docs or SharePoint, where you're modifying your documents, you might have like a product details page, and on that you put a reference to the product details block, which has correlating implementation in your code repo for product details. And in that code repo, you'll see the starting point of the integration to the commerce drop-ins there. Yeah, so we can pull one of those up if people want to look at code and stuff. Yes. But that's high level.
That would be high level. The commerce drop-ins are just JavaScript. Cedric, a long time ago, we were talking about the concept of how all of this will work. Back then, we called them micro front end, and we decided not to call them micro front ends because of semantics. If you go deal with what a micro front end is, there's a point where it stopped being a micro front end, right? It's just UI components. But he described it back then. You just bring it, right? Like these are just UI that you bring to your website, you render it. You have you in the initializer, you set up, this is the Adobe Commerce endpoint that I want to use. And they have an underlying, event bus where they communicate with each other. So they're all fully dependent. That's what make it composable. That if you have card, you have your merchant, let's say PDP, right? PDP is a drop-in that gives you the product detail page. But let's say you are an automaker and your use case is so custom, right? It's specific to you. Like you can remove that, drop it, and then just build your own. You can build it as a React application that you bring in, or as a edge delivery service blocks, and then you can use the drop-ins APIs and the event bus to communicate your PDP to cart and kind of linking together. So
Edge delivery services.
what make it composable. But yes, back then when we were talking, we talk about the initial goal was to make it agnostic. This not only work on edge delivery service, but it could work in any framework or non-framework at all. And doesn't mean that for some magic reason this thing also is Angular code or React code or Vue code. No, it's just JavaScript. It can be integrated into a React component, a Vue component, or edge delivery service block. And Cedric analogy was, this is like a Google Maps widget, right? You bring the script and you have Google Maps out of the box, vanilla, right? If that's what you want, that's what you want. Then you have APIs. Well, I want to change the markers. Then you can use API functions to make modifications inside of it. I just want to use the technology behind it to build my own layer to it. Then you just use the API functions to just build and tie everything up. So it's kind of like that when we mean it works on everything, because it works on everything. It works on edge delivery service. So what the boilerplate is the same AM boilerplate that you get. It's a fork of it, but we added extra blocks, commerce blocks into that boilerplate that have those drop-in components pre-integrated. So you don't have to do all that work. So you can just, like Steven mentioned, just fork the project, run it, you have a storefront. And from here, it's just going through the customization layer to change it and make it your own.
So we basically have, on the one hand, composability with regards to what is the delivery surface for the site in the first place, right? You said you can use edge delivery services, you can use a plain HTML if you're still capable of writing that, or any other system. And on the other hand, you also have composability within the drop-ins, right? So that every single drop-in is customizable, and then on top of that, you can even replace particular drop-ins by others. And it looks like Steven is starting a stream with the demo. So this is.
Did it work?
Yep.
I don't know. I haven't really
Yes.
I don't really share my screen on Discord.
Yes.
I just wanted to dive into.
Yep.
I'm hearing noises from Discord. I don't know what they mean, like do. So I don't know what that means. I think you guys can see my screen.
Yes.
We were just talking about like the composition you were saying about within the delivery system. So here we're in our boilerplate and we're inside one of those blocks that might be referenced from the document. And within that block, we do even more composition or decomposition. We've got this is the example of the product details page where we define sort of like the structure of the template, I guess, if you will, of what we think is a good starting point. We give you these divs, and then essentially, you can see we select them, and then we render into them these containers. So you'll see a lot of these imports come from the drop-ins, whatever drop-in they come from. They've got different interface, different options you can pass depending on which one you're using. But This the point that I'm trying to get across here is that this structure is defined here in this fragment, but
Right.
that doesn't mean, that anyone is married to that. Merchants are free to modify this here if as they wish. Move things around, and the rendering will still occur in the same way.
Right.
The output of that, and I'll just show you a simple example. You guys have all probably poked around on the demo site that we've got running right now. Something like this. And Carlos, remind me the command to show the containers. Do we even have it here?
Drop-ins. Yeah, should be. Yeah. Yeah.
This one?
Yep.
No, I thought there's one for the containers that you had, but maybe that was just an image that you had
No.
made. Anyways,
Yes,
the
it's
containers.
slots,
Yeah, this is slots. This is another thing we can talk about later. But I was hoping to just like visually represent for people the different containers that are on this page. But you can kind of get
Well,
the idea of looking at that fragment.
Somebody wrote a really long post that has images and description of this breakdown of containers. So if you want to look at it.
No, we're not going to get into the post. No, I just don't have that link right now. Yeah. Yeah, what should we
but
talk
from
about
here,
next?
in here, the first thing the customers, the first question, because this went through an evolution, right? We build this during VIP projects to make sure that we build things based on real life requirements and not based on the assumptions that we have built for the last 10 years working on Magento. And initially, the first iteration of this was this nice like 3 lines function that created a whole PDP, and I was so proud of it. It was great for demos. You just import, render this full page. I was so happy about it.
Case.
It
still
is
a
the
similar
case.
Case for like the mini cart, for example. It was very
but PDP, that was the first one, right? And I went to front of developers like, look, you can build a PDP 3 lines, and they're like, cool. How do I change this? How do I change that? And I was like, well, let's hear what you want to change. We want to change everything because every site is different. And then I go to all e-commerce site and they'll look the same. And I'm like, okay, well, there's a middle ground here. Like, no, you don't have to change everything. Like let's look at it. And then, if you go back to that PDP, Steven, that was the first learning, and that's sort of the iteration that we went through. The VIP projects here and what our partners, our merchants were doing and wanted to do. And that's how we start breaking out the drop-ins, which initially was one container, the full PDP, which still exists. You can still use that. But we break it down in the boilerplate to, okay, what if every, I don't want to call it block, but element of the page, it's its own container. We have a
like every like large chunk of functionality. Not every element on the page, but like the gallery, for example. We're not doing like a gallery image as a container, but we're doing, the gallery itself as a.
Right. So what instead of just making composable the whole unit of a drop-in, what if we make like the like containers inside composable? So not only you can swap the drop-in altogether, but you only. What if you have your own custom gallery and you want to just swap that? Like you can do that. But especially like, what do you want to change the layout of the page? Like make it easier that way because it's just an HTML fragment. You can change the order positions of everything, restyle it however you want. But that was one of the big learnings, at least from me, from this project, is engineers between 3 lines of code or 100 lines of code, they take the 100 lines of code because that means that's 100 lines of code that they can change. But then inside those containers, there's customization to that, right? Like, yes, there's some common patterns that we have implemented as flags or properties or configurations. So if you put in the gallery image and you want thumbnails, there's a thumbnails true, arrows true, right? There's some basic configuration to do the common things. And on top of that, there's a whole other layer of configuration called slots, which are predefined areas of containers that allows you just to go in there, inject, or change those areas. An example of would be, I think in here will
Button,
be
the add to cart button.
the add to cart. No, the add to cart button is just part of the block now. I think it's the
Cool.
configuration. When you make selections in the configuration, let's say that a t-shirt, medium, large, extra large. If you want to append like a link for size chart for sizes, then you can tap into one of those slots, and then it's pretty much just another function, and then you just keep doing the same JavaScript code that you're doing in your blog, but inside that specific slot. So that enables us to extend those containers further, so we can give you more flexibility. Our goal is to find that right balance, right? That you can use these pre-made containers, configure as much as you can, and hopefully use and save you time and get to market faster. But again, there's going to be cases where your website or that page is just custom to you. So, and then for that, we'd also expose all the API functions and event bus events that you can use to just build your own HTML DOM experience, and then just tap into that to communicate with the rest of the drop-ins.
Okay. So you mentioned an event bus. What are things how customers would use this event bus to integrate?
Do we have an example of like the language? You can see some use of events here. This is probably a pretty straightforward one that you can see.
Yeah, it's a simple one, right? Like, for example, if you go to the PDP, you have to think of, this is a product detail page. The add to cart button, like the product detail page doesn't know anything about a cart. It's just a PDP. That button is external. So on the block, we are injecting that button, and then we're importing the add to cart function from the cart drop-in. And then when you click on it, you send this data to the cart. But then in this very simple use case, we want to make sure that the add to cart button, which is not in the drop-in, gets disabled until you make selection, until it's valid. So there's that event. Steven, if you want to scroll down.
We first set on clicked disabled, and then you can see after validation events we
so there's that event that the PDP sends, right? So you can subscribe to when the PDP valid event, and then when it's valid, then just make the button valid. Or that's a very simple example, but
it's like every time this button is clicked, the PDP valid event would be sent, but the add to cart is still disabled until you've selected all options, and then it's enabled.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. So I could.
But yeah, that event bus is sort of. Yeah. Sorry, I was going to say that event bus is just a way for us, because we have these decomposed, separate sort of areas of responsibility in code. The event bus was a way for us to allow merchants to handle communication between those places, between those drop-ins.
And just to give you an example too, let's say you have you stayed in the product detail page. You have a custom piece of content in there that requires data from PDP. You don't have to go and make that query to the Adobe Commerce endpoint to find the data. You can just subscribe to the PDP data. So anytime that changes, like you make a selection, you get new data, new prices, new configuration, things like that. So you can subscribe to all those from an external piece of code to build custom UIs using that same data. So you can make any code in your block and your Edge Delivery Service block reactive by using this event, and you can also emit events and have the pre-built drop-in containers react to those changes.
Okay, makes sense. Good. If we go back to the code, I saw a couple of things that I wanted to ask questions about. One was, we have it right here in your create contextual fragment. You have. So this HTML looks like it's written for people who, on the one hand, love div soup, and on the other hand, don't know that there's a CSS descendant selector. Is that required, or if I'm in the unlikely scenario that I'm highly opinionated about the HTML that I want to put on my page, would I be able to just change this and say let's take completely different selectors and
Yeah,
classes?
I think Carlos probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I think these classes are only here for the benefit of these query selectors that are used below to obtain a reference to those fragments. So there's no other than having some target to inject the drop-in or the container into. They're not, that structure is entirely up to the coder, the developer here.
Yeah,
So
it
you
was
could move
implemented
any of
like
these divs
this.
around.
Yeah.
You could do whatever you want. If you needed to shift or put description below, move gallery at the bottom or something, whatever you want to do, you can shuffle this around. You can change the names. You can change the CSS.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you scroll down a bit more, I think I spotted some GraphQL code in there as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think this is different. This is about metadata generation. These functions you see. Is that what you were going to ask?
Yeah. Well, okay. So this is about injecting JSON LD into the product page, and so these GraphQL queries. How likely is it that somebody who's working on a commerce site needs to change these or needs to play with these?
How likely is it someone working on like this block here?
Yes.
I would say probably fairly low, unless like this specific function probably does not need to get changed. Its intent was to create that JSON LD structure for injection on the page during client-side rendering. And that data is currently fetched, as you can see, using this query. And we're using a more minimal query, I think, than what you might find within the product details drop-in itself. But unless there was some discovery about, so let's talk about how this was created. So this wasn't here originally, and then as we were working, we found, we need to make sure that JSON LD is generated for these client-side rendered pages properly.
Yep.
So this is one of the approaches we came up with, and that's how a lot of stuff ends up in the boilerplate. It's like the best practices or learnings, like Carlos mentioned, from engagements with customers and merchants. And so unless we discovered some issue with this function here, I would not expect us to need to make changes, or would not expect customers or merchants to need to make changes. But and this is, I think, AEM or edge delivery standard that, like, once you fork this repo, it's yours and yours to maintain. So we may update this boilerplate, and you would need to be monitoring to see, okay, why did they make this change? Maybe there's some JSON LD field we missed, and so we need to also make sure we get that.
But it basically means don't pull in changes blindly, right? Reflect whether you need a new feature, and if you need it, adopt it, and if you don't need it, no harm done.
Yeah. Yes, and one thing we should probably have mentioned in your question about the architecture of the drop-in components. They are installed in the boilerplate using npm. We have a task where you run npm install that it pull the files and then it copy it over to the script folder. So they're hosted on your project. But there's we use a semantic version in here. So if the idea here is that we can release changes or upgrades to these drop-ins, that if you're a merchant, you started a project out of the boilerplate, you customize the hell out of it, as you should. and you are in production and there's a new feature, a new fix that you want to update and a specific drop-in, you can go ahead and bump that version in your project. It doesn't require you to go, right? You shouldn't be, it's a boilerplate. It's a starting point, like any other AEM boilerplate. You shouldn't try to go and do a PR and deal with all those conflicts, right? Because you have changed that layer at this point. But you can just bump your version, do your round of QA, of course, make sure that everything works fine. Mitigate if something doesn't, and upgrade the drop-ins. This idea, right, that we have these composable components that you can just install and upgrade as you need to.
Right. Okay. So, I noticed that I was the only one asking questions so far. So, and we have a great number of people here on the call. So, are there other questions from the audience?
Yes, I have a question, if I may. Did you try also these things with the crosswalk, or how would be the integration? Crosswalk, so we put it in AM actually and want to exchange it with the old CIF, because it will be discontinued in 2 years or so.
So is the question using this boilerplate in Crosswalk,
Yes.
essentially? Well, actually,
You should try this.
I don't know if you. Yeah, so I think Chris just dropped. I don't know how much we can say. We have not, at least I have not. Carlos has not done anything with Crosswalk with this boilerplate yet. I don't know, Lars. Do you have any other details there from your side?
Yeah. So architecturally, these two should be pretty insulated from each other, right? Because the commerce drop-ins are operating on the HTML that Edge Delivery Services is delivering, and that's standardized, and Edge Delivery Services, right, and especially things that are sitting on top of Edge Delivery Services don't really care how you got your content in there in the first place, right? So when it comes to developing this, the biggest thing that you have to do is you have to take the things either, and I think the commerce boilerplate is bigger than the crosswalk boilerplate, right? So you have to take the files that are in the crosswalk boilerplate but not in the commerce boilerplate, copy them over into your repository, and then you can develop custom block components for Universal Editor using the files, the model files copied from crosswalk boilerplate, but on the delivery side and then on the commerce side, it doesn't matter. It's still the same.
And the configuration is also isolated, so you have a config file where you put all the endpoints and GraphQL as well, and also the environments, as I noticed in the code.
Yes, if you're talking about for commerce, yes, that's currently how we're doing it. We're looking at also moving a lot of that configuration out of these files and into the config service that AEM hosts. But we're gonna do that probably after Summit, so we don't throw a bunch of chaos into the mix.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That was all from my end.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So you've been talking about your development process and that, and I was happy to hear that a lot of this is feedback coming from users, from customers who are using these drop-ins. Can you tell us a bit about customers that have adopted this approach already?
So we have, I don't know exact numbers and I don't know exactly which drop-ins. I do know we have several customers that are using at least the PDP drop-in. I know that we have some partners exploring using the other drop-ins. I know that we have some VIP projects coming up with some of these other drop-ins. But yeah, today, I believe we only have customers using the PDP drop-in for now.
Right. Okay. And they basically bring their own shopping cart implementation
Yeah.
Is that
So there's a thing which we're calling like a bridge, which is essentially a connection between your commerce pages, your content pages, and your commerce website. And so one way to think about it is essentially you have edge delivery services on one hand hosting all these content pages, product detail pages, eventually maybe your cart and checkout. But if you wanted to do like a migration or if you had some other commerce backend, then that can still be hosted on this other um, site or server. So essentially, how we have documented is to do CDN based routing, where you have your and I'll just use Commerce, Adobe Commerce as an example here.
Yep.
So using Commerce Fastly, we have a VCL rule that sits like in front of everything, and it says incoming request, what is your path? If the path matches a specific commerce route, like slash checkout, for example, say you haven't migrated your checkout, or slash cart if you haven't migrated your cart, then the request goes to the commerce server,
right?
returns the commerce HTML, and that gets rendered in the page. And so that way you can sort of migrate your pages over, and there's when I mentioned bridge, there's with that you have to have some session synchronization between the commerce backend and the user's edge delivery session. So there's this sort of handshake that's happening. None of this is documented, I believe, although I couldn't point you at it right now. And at this point in time, it's more like a spec, sort of like how we suggest how you implement your Fastly Commerce VCLs. The bridge is also more of like a, you need to go, if you have this need to have this session sharing, then you have to implement that.
Yeah, some of the customers, and we start with PDP, and the reason of the need for this bridge is because drop-ins are composable, so they all have their own release schedule. We started with PDP first. It was our proof of concept, and that's the one that got adopted first during this VIP projects. And the other drop-in had, December, I believe, was when we went GA with the rest of the drop-ins. So now we are onboarding new VIP projects that will start utilizing like the full stack. And in some cases, they might have a checkout that depend for existing customers, right? They might have a checkout experience that depends on extension, like Magento, like Adobe Commerce extension from the marketplace. So they must use the Adobe Commerce, right? The PHP checkout flow. So that's part of the composable aspect of it, right? Like you can build a site, so you can go to market faster. You don't have to wait until you refactor the whole checkout, but you can then, this page is going to be side loaded from we call Luma, like the PHP Adobe Commerce side, and then once you create a new experience, then you can swap whenever you're ready.
Yeah, and it's great to see the right. So one of the things that I really like about Adobe Commerce is that you don't just get Fastly CDN bundled, which is a fantastic CDN, but you can also write the VCL code directly. And VCL is right. So the upside of VCL is it's a super powerful language. The downside is it's a super powerful
language.
Exactly. But obviously this documentation looks great and very detailed, so it's good to see that, and it's a slightly different approach that AEM Sites is taking, right, where you also have a Fastly bundled, but you're basically remote controlling it via writing YAML files, and some people like that, and some people like other formats. So
it's actually really interesting because Fastly is one of the last things you might set up on your site. So this documentation that you're seeing here is sort of the outcome of a lot of work that I did with some other folks to get sort of like a minimum viable VCL reference for folks so that they can actually get a site running. Like this site is this aemshop.net is basically using all the config that you see in here. And that's how we ended up with the documentation.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very powerful, and you can easily lock yourself out of things if you're not careful. And commerce customers will probably be aware they don't have the ability to like roll back the Fastly VCLs themselves if they do something like that. So it can be a little tricky.
Interesting.
And yeah, so we want to make sure it's we're like very clear about what you need to do, and also noting things like what you should make sure not to do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Fastly just announced, I think last week, a feature called staging environments. And
okay.
Yep. And I noticed it, or I was made aware of it a couple of weeks ago by another developer who's working on AEM assets, who's been working on a tool set. Hey, look at this new thing in the Fastly documentation. Do you know anything about it? And I said, I've never seen this, and I've actually implemented a client that covers all of the Fastly API service, right? So I should have seen it. And it turned out that they were releasing documentation before shipping the feature. So and they just released it. So
Nice.
that could be a cool thing to have for customers who want a bit more deliberate rollout process for VCL changes.
Cool. I'll have to look into that after this.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I think we have one more. We have time for one more question from the audience.
I had some experience working with that customer. It was very interesting. They were on an older version of Adobe Commerce. I think it was the Luma-based version. So I think there was something called a Luma bridge to help bridge that gap of the older GraphQL versions. I guess I'm just curious, do we still see those customers out there that are on older versions of Adobe Commerce that require this third-party bridge, or is it kind of more streamlined these days?
So bridge is less about I'm not familiar with which customer you're referring to here, but the bridge is okay, yeah. So there's currently a requirement for using these drop-ins, which is they're just micro front ends that get their data to render from an API, right? And so there needs to be like a consistent schema from that API. So we had to pin it to something, and we pinned it to 247. And on top of that, we started working on what's called the storefront compatibility package, which is sort of like the way that we can continue to iterate on the next version of Commerce, so 248, for example. So I guess just what we have today is we have 247 Commerce backend with this compatibility package that brings some schema from 248 to our Commerce instance. If a customer has an older version of Commerce, they're likely not going to work without some customization. And I'm not familiar exactly what the customization would be, but like just they would be missing some of that, potentially be missing some of the schema which these drop-ins require. That actually gets into two topics. We have, one more topic, which is that we have created this thing called GraphQL extensibility, which is essentially like a build time tool that we built that lets you augment the requests that are made by the drop-ins, either mostly additive, but now we're looking at letting the storefront developers remove GraphQL. So let's say that you, for example, don't have downloadable products in your schema, then you can remove that from the query that gets made by the drop-ins without breaking your GraphQL request. That doesn't really answer your question about like the bridge. And I would just, to clarify, the bridge is more about sessions between Edge delivery front end and the Commerce backend, not about Commerce versions. So it's just a different thing there. But good topics anyways.
Yeah, still helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So Stephen, Carlos, thank you so much for the time today. Thank you for the demo. I would like to remember everybody that we do have a hash storefront channel in Discord, in case you have additional questions, in case you have follow-up questions. And I think now that Stephen and Carlos have found their way to Discord, they're going to stick around and be able to answer questions there. And normally I would ask Dominik, hey, what are we going to talk about next time? But I have something that I wanted to ask for participation, actually. So we have, I think that's March 13th. Is that correct, Dominik?
The first is February 13th with the effective calendar implementation with Ashta.
Yeah, let's talk about March 13th.
Okay, and then we have March 13th about the wild battle. So let's do.
Right. So I noticed that we have a bunch of template implementations in the Helix block party. So I said, why don't we invite all of these people who've come up with the templating language or some other development framework on top of Edge Delivery Services and just battle it out, right? So the idea is I'm going to come up with a specification for a particular block, and then we have multiple teams who are going to live code and implement that block, and I hope that we can stream them all at the same time, that I can switch between them. At the moment, most of the contenders are from Adobe and from the Edge Delivery Services team. And I would like to put out a challenge. If you think that you can outcode the Adobe folks, if you think that you have the secret sauce that makes Edge Delivery implementations even faster, I want to hear from you. And I want to see you form a team and join us for this epic code smackdown. So that's it. The date is March 13th. We are going to have a bunch of contenders. You are all very much invited. I'm really excited about this because I don't know which team is going to win. And I really want to see all of these things in action. So I hope some of you feel inspired and think, yeah, I can do this. If you have any doubts, ping me, and I will convince you otherwise. And I'm hoping to see a lot of people join this session, and that we're going to have a lot of fun.
Cool.
And that brings me to my usual question, Dominik. What are we going to talk about next time, and when is next time?
Okay, next time is February 13th, and we will talk about effective calendar implementation in Edge Delivery Services. There will be Ashta and Meet. I know there will also be a blog post, and we just have to tweak it a little bit also for a public blog. So there is a lot of information around. I think also in the blog party there is a effective calendar implementation, and then, as Lars said, there will be in March the battle, and I hope we can organize something in between, but these are the ones that are coming up.
Okay, sounds great.
Super. Then thanks a lot for being here. If you just look at the recording, please join next time.
Edge Delivery Services.
Thanks, everyone.
Services.
All right, bye, y'all.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good to see you all.